Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank. I'm here with Joseph. Joseph, please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening. We're not live, but at the same time, people want to know who you are.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me on, Robbie. I am many things, as I suspect everyone is on this show. It's a pleasure to be here. I am originally from Canton, Georgia, which is northern Atlanta-ish. I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Alabama for religious studies, focusing mostly on things like, what?
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide, indeed, yes. Saddened by last night's events. It was a close game, but glad that if anyone had to be Alabama, it was Georgia. But yeah, I mostly focus on things like asking questions about how groups and identities form, like why is it that thing becomes a nationality or a philosophy or religion? And to get to the most important and deepest thing you can know about me, my favorite color is a dark forest green.
Dark forest green. Yeah, it's a good first question. It's how I now depict how my lighting is going to be for the show, which means I have to plan accordingly. What made you, I guess, get interested in getting your degree in something like that?
Yeah, so I actually did my undergraduate at Young Harris College, a little liberal arts college in the middle of nowhere, North Georgia, like only 1,000 students, like smaller than my high school. How many people were at your high school, by the way?
I think there's 950 in my senior class.
Dang, yeah. So my undergraduate was probably about a fourth of the size of your high school, because there's maybe 300 students in my graduating class. So very small school. While I was there, I pursued a double major in history and religious studies, got a minor in philosophy. And then from there, moved to Alabama in the middle of a pandemic. And here we are.
Well, are you religious per se?
That's a very complicated question.
Yeah. I'm not religious at all, but I just want to, like, because religious studies, for instance, I've talked to a few people who have been involved in religious studies and they're not religious either. And I think it's like from an examining point of like, it seems like everybody's got a piece to the same exact puzzle. I think religion's needed, but obviously today, climate, a lot of people aren't super religious, or there's so many religions out there. I mean, I think Christianity went from like 90 something percent, like 50, 60 years ago to now it's at like 42. And then there's a large amount of people that just don't know what to believe in.
Yeah. So two things. The first one is that with the program I'm at right now, it specializes in method and theory. So one of the things we often bring to question is when it comes to these conversations about what even constitutes or qualifies religion, that's not usually a clear-cut thing, right? Depending on the context, we could be talking about different things, very different things. So for example, a lot of surveys will ask these questions like, are you religious? Do you identify with a certain tradition? Like asking specific questions about these metrics of like, how often do you go to a church or a house of worship? So the kind of weird assumptions that are made about what constitutes religion or what doesn't constitute religion, that's something that's worth studying. And sadly, I don't think there are enough people who investigate that. But the second thing I want to say that I think goes hand in hand with what you're just saying about other guests you've had, it's interesting how scholars in religion, unlike scholars in theology, tend to usually distance themselves from the material. Not always, but often. Going back to what you were saying of like, because you were saying something to the effect of like, they would say, I'm not particularly religious per se, but I study Christianity, Hinduism, something like that, right?
Yeah.
So there's something funny going on there in the way that how different fields of inquiry position themselves either really close or within certain traditions or outside of them, studying them from like an edict or like a foreign perspective. which is that's one of the biggest difference, generally speaking, between theology and religious studies, is that theologians are usually trained within a certain tradition. Like if you go to, say, Emory, if you go pursue a degree like a master's in divinity there, you're going to be probably learning how to be a Methodist priest or some other clergy member of the church. Whereas if you're pursuing a degree in religious studies, you're probably a scholar who, like an American studies or Russian studies scholar, uses different fields, different forms of inquiry to then investigate questions about religion. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Sorry, I kind of get on little lectures and rants and
It's good
tangents,
information.
but to answer your earlier question, way earlier, of why religious studies is a unique field because methods-wise, I'm interested in examining questions like a historian or a philosopher, but I tend to find many historical and philosophical approaches to studying things antagonize each other, if that makes sense. Like historians will look at philosophers and say they're just talking out of their asses, and philosophers will look at historians and say they aren't stopping and thinking about their terms. And so I find religious studies is a great field because it doesn't have that weird institutional politic you see in a lot of other departments in the university, if that makes sense.
Yeah. See, the process of information and how you choose to explain it can come off one of two ways. One way is that a historian could be by the book, but let's say a philosophy person, it's very hard to accept information when it's coming from someone who's younger compared to if it's speaking from an older perspective. If it's coming from an old man, for instance, I might say something that could be a quotable thing you could put in a book, but it might not get taken the same way, or someone listening might be like, well, that's just a kid, because that's how they view it, because it's so hard to soak in information from something that is younger than you, where you seem like it hasn't been experienced. But I think me and you both know that kid who was 13 years old in school who smokes cigarettes, and you're like, that kid is seasoned with some pain, whether it's home issues, whatever it is, but they have a different way of thinking about things. Like, yeah, I've had sex like 15 times. You're like, you're 13. What are you talking about? But they've experienced a different realm. And it's hard for people, I guess, to understand that information. I mean, the word philosopher, in my opinion, has been dumbed down to the dumbest point possible, just not with people involved in it. It's just Twitter. Twitter has given everyone that title. It's like putting stand-up comic in your Twitter bio,
Or a Twitch streamer, perhaps, right?
That exact thing. Anything when it comes to this, it's like people who are podcast people put broadcaster in there. I've said multiple times on this show, I'm not a broadcaster. I'm not any of that. I'm a professional jackass with a microphone. That's how you got to come off. Dumb it down, do whatever. But people like to make it seem very, very hyped up, or in some type of way that they're better or superior. That might come with the factor that there's a lot of academics out there, and that's kind of how you have to get noticed. I mean, like, it's like going to school for an arts degree. You can have a master in the arts field, whatever you want to say. A lot of people go, that's a waste of a career choice. Necessarily, if that person enjoys that, is it a waste? I don't think so. But they'll say that because everyone wants you to have a mathematics degree. There's just basic standards across the board when it comes to the way that professionalism works, or the way that careers work, or the way that getting a job, or any of these types of qualities, which I feel like need to change with the times. Like, you shouldn't have to worry about getting a massive degree to be able to get the job that you want to get. You should just have an equal opportunity to get a chance or a shot to see if you're really meant to do this type of thing. I've talked to almost 1,000. Actually, I've talked to probably more than 1,000 people. I think that qualifies me for getting some type of chance at trying to talk to someone as a therapist or something like that. But that's not it, because you don't get a master's degree. I went to college. I got chemical dependency, went to school a little bit for psychology, and then I was done. There was no master's degree involved, but that's what they want. So that's what they're going to hire for.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on the context, right? It depends on the context of a number of things there. So like with both of the two different sort of things I heard you getting at there, the first one being like the sort of Twitter politic of how you advertise yourself, for better or for worse, whether or not that tracks on with reality, or how we perceive reality, depending on what you choose to call yourself and what you do. And then that second thing I kind of heard you getting at there with like Why is it that seems like certain degrees perhaps aren't necessary for one to perform well in a role, in a job, in an institution, what have you, if you have enough relevant experience? I think it really depends on the context of a number of things. Like, I think the therapy example you bring up is a fun one to play with, because what a psychiatrist, what a family therapist, there are many different schools of psychology and therapy, and what one is doing in a specific one, those skills may or may not translate. Um, but I hear what you're getting at, where it seems like the experiences you've had talking with so many folks and vibing with so many people and asking them what their favorite color is, you'd think those skills would
That
be.
was the first time I've ever asked that freaking question to anybody. It was just to do the lights for the show. This is brand new, bro.
Really, I am
That's not
I
like
am honored.
that's not some type of psychological mind game. I wasn't
I
doing that. I
was
was
I was
legit.
over here. I
Yeah.
was over here sitting here thinking this was like some Myers-Briggs, personality matrix. Ask the color and
I
see.
wish. I wish I was that talented to do that.
But hey, maybe one day. But I think I've been reading to bring it back to the conversation, though. I've been reading some bell hooks recently. She passed away fairly recently. She was, amongst many other things, she was an author sort of focusing in feminist theory and talking about race and teaching and pedagogy. And one of the things she talks about frequently in her writing, from what I've read, is how much more important it is to have a love of learning and be a self-taught learner than just to pursue the degree for the sake of the economic interests of, okay, now that I have this piece of paper, right, now I can go get the job doing X at place Y, doing thing Z. So that was also another thing I kind of heard you getting at there, is the importance of being a lifelong learner, something like that, right?
Well, there's a lot of people I feel like that are fit to do the jobs that they should be able to. You should have an equal opportunity to be able to do that. A lot of people boil it down to a race thing, saying all races should have this type of thing. I think it boils down even farther than that. I think it's any person, any human species. Where I mean, we're all the same species, but people like to categorize stuff and put in certain things. And hey, I want everyone to feel free. I want everyone to have the equal opportunities that they should have. But the professionalism, capitalism, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really work like that. I don't think a lot of people pay attention to that type of thing. I'm not trying to say communism. I'm just saying on an aspect of like there's a system that is set into place that makes you feel like it's cutthroat competition. And you'll see that anywhere you look, whether it's social media, whether whatever it is, it's very, very easy to have a discourse like this or a conversation like this, but a lot of people expect an interview. A lot of people expect things that are going to be more personal to them, and they're going to use that to get ahead, or they're going to use that on their resume or some type of thing, rather than just coming to the table clean and having a conversation. I've discovered that through doing the show. I'm not mad at them for that, because you have to
Mm-hmm.
do what you have to do to get ahead. You really do. You have to make a splash in this giant pool that's out there. But I think we all help each other in some type of sense. I don't know how. Maybe it's a certain thing, or maybe just having a friendly discussion. I've linked people with other people that have helped them out. Maybe that's it, or maybe just discovering a new friend. I have no clue. But you don't ever see those objectives on the horizon. It always takes you down a different dark rabbit hole. And then I don't want to get into the motivational shit, because I really hate the motivational shit. But it's just it's so complicated in life in general, and I feel like maybe a part of the factor of why it's complicated is that people also don't give the open door for opportunity. They're not given it, and they're also not really looking for it a whole lot of times either. There are a lot of people that rather close a door than open one, and I think during 2021, hopefully 2022 is an opening of some of those doors. It's what a lot of people did. Family members blocking each other on Twitter or whatever they call it because they tweet something political they don't like. Get the fuck over it. Like I hate to say it like that, but in some sense, it's like in the grand scheme of things, it's like I just lost one of my favorite comedians. Basically, Bob Saget died. I had three heroes and they're all dead now. So I'm like, it just shows you like
Now your
60.
villain arc begins. No,
Oh
I'm just
yeah, my
messing with
origin
you.
story. But a
Yeah.
man 65 years old and was beloved by a lot of people. But I saw so many people just tweeting who never talked about him before. And I just go, does anybody realize the amount of benefit he did to Charcot Marie Tooth syndrome that his sister died from? He raised not billions, millions of dollars towards that foundation every single year. Like people did amazing things because they could and they wanted to do those things. It's not hard to do those things, but people feel like they're being cheated in a sense, and maybe in a sense they are. But they're not being cheated by their fellow man. They're being cheated by a system that's going to keep them basically sniffing shit 24/7.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely with the hyper professionalism I think we see nowadays. I mean, of course, these things vary from industry to industry and group to group and place to place. But something I was hearing you hit on there was how, just make sure we're on the same page, like this weird thing that happens where when someone dies, and it's treated as a current event, people seem to take very different positions and approaches to how that person lived and what their life was worth. Yeah, something like that.
More like people tweet for attention all because they
Mm,
can.
it's the hot topic.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you have a family member that passes away, God forbid, but then you go to the funeral and there's a bunch of people that you've never seen or never even heard of that just show
Mhm.
up acting like they meant so much to that person, even though they never gave them a call or a Christmas card. You see that a lot. And I think that's like a group call for attention, which I don't know. I see that as maybe that's an issue or that's a weird kind of way of trying to get attention. It's kind of like, I'm leaving Twitter, everyone. Just fucking go. Like, what are we talking about? Like, you need to make a public announcement that you're leaving Twitter. I don't think that many people care.
Yeah, I once made the mistake of making one of those announcements and then realized how cringy it was after and said, never again, never again. When
You end
I'm
up
not
going
on
back
social
on it.
media, yeah, I'll eventually end up back on it again. Never again. But
It's like if you
yeah,
delete the app, it somehow shows back up on your phone. You're like, oh, well, this is here.
yeah. Oh no, I've slipped. I fell back into the Twitter. But yeah, I mean, it's something to be said though about how we portray sincerity, authenticity, these kinds of things, and how from different perspectives, these same acts can look radically different. I think of this when speaking of social media, like behavior, politics. I think of this when people like on Mother's Day will write a public note to their mother.
Oh, yeah. They'll make
That
a
is an
public post
interesting
about it.
that is an interesting act of performativity, right? That's an interesting act. And it goes, and I think it goes hand in hand with these other acts we've been talking about, like showing up to a funeral to someone you don't really know, but acting something like this. Yeah.
That's such a great example. I never even thought about that. I see that all the time when someone wishes someone a happy birthday to like their son or their mother or someone like that. I'm like, don't you have their number? Like, give them a call, man.
Right. Why doesn't this happen I mean privately? Why does this happen in a space to where, me as the casual Twitter alcoholic, Twitter colic, Twitter, what do you call someone who is stuck on Twitter or can't get off of it?
I say tweetaholic.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, as a casual tweetaholic, why am I looking at this? And there's a part of me that wants to be credulous and the sense of like, could you please like take, same thing with PDA, like when photos of people who are kissing and they make that their profile picture, and it's like, I do not need to see that every time
I'd rather see that than what they usually do, which is like their fucking hand down the person's pants and going that way. I'm like, this is
yikes.
we're in a Whole Foods.
Yikes, big oof. But when it comes to these discourses about like, what looks sincere or authentic or whatever on social media, the first thing I want to do is jump to the same conclusion you did of like, why couldn't you just texted this, called them, privately corresponded with them? But then I start to think about it like a social theorist in the sense of like, okay, but what work is being done here? We're never neutral performers in our societies. We're always performing certain roles, whether we're conscious of them or not. So when we do something like this, like a very public post that seems like it should be private or performing a certain way in a physical space, like say a funeral, what kind of work is the individual doing, whether or not they're conscious of what role they're performing in a larger system? And to be fair, even I'm doing this as well, as I am the byproduct of the things I've read and the things I've studied and the people I've interacted with, just like anyone else.
I feel like you're psychologically trying to chess match
me. I do love chess. I don't know if I told you that.
I've never played a game.
Never played a game. I'll have to add you on chess.com sometime. I'll teach you.
We got to do it. It had to be in person. I can't play chess on the computer. It's like trying to play solitaire.
On a computer?
Yeah. Solitaire on a computer is terrible.
I thought you were setting yourself up for a joke there, since so many people play solitaire on the computer as well as with the physical cards.
I
But
didn't even know there was a physical version of it.
oh
I
my
guess
gosh,
you could, but I've just never seen people do it before.
from my pre-internet childhood, solitaire and the what's it called before arcade games when you hit the buttons and there's a ball and you're trying to keep the ball in play? What's that called?
Pinball?
Yeah.
You forgot the
Pinball.
word pinball?
I did.
That's
I
like
appreciate you helping me
I
in this
freaking
difficult
love those
moment.
machines, man. Those are awesome.
But in my pre-internet childhood, computer pinball and solitaire were how I kept myself entertained. All that to say that, going back to psychological chess matching you, no, I'm not trying to psychological chess match you. Although if you do want to play a game of chess, hit me up. I'll show you how to play. We'll move pieces around the board. It'll be fun. But just pointing out that like there's this weird thing that goes on with how we, not only you and I, but we as humans in general, seem to establish or figure out, whether someone seems to be authentic, sincere, if it's even the appropriate social space for whatever it is they're doing.
I think it's easier to just not think and say things, and people really sort those things out. Like, I don't really think a whole lot before I say a lot of things, and sometimes it might come off where I have to might reiterate or explain myself. I just feel like it gets to a point where it's like it's so hard, the idea of coming to the table clean for a lot of, like, it's weird. Like, I'm so like, I know you probably, we tried to set this up before, but it's hesitant because it's just a conversation. I don't give you a whole lot, and we're just kind of like, we're going to talk, and that's kind of how it goes. I just got to hope you can kind of put faith in me, and which you don't have any reason to. And that's kind of how it goes. But I've done it for 1,000 something episodes. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think there's a natural inherent discourse or wantingness to have this type of back and forth conversation and chat and stuff. But I feel like the way it gets done through Twitter or the way it gets done through social media is just very, very tense and aggressive. I think there's a lot of good people out there. I could tell you're a good person just because you don't look like someone who wants to kick puppies. I'm not saying by like your style of clothing or anything, but you don't look like someone who has hate in their heart, which you can easily tell. Someone who doesn't have any time. You wouldn't be here if you did. You know what I mean?
Man,
But
now I feel like you're psychologizing me over here
no,
with
I'm trying to boil it down to a bigger point of, like, on Twitter, for instance, you can't tell what a person is meaning behind the things that they say. So everything might come off
right.
as an attack, and it's kind of not really that way necessarily. Someone might just be on voicing their opinion wrong, or might be saying something like, if I comment something on someone's thing, they'll take it like, all right, well, you didn't need to comment that. I was like, oh no, I was just saying you forgot to add a colon in between the sentence part, so it just doesn't make sense. I wasn't trying to be a jerk about it, but it comes
Right.
off that way. And I
Why
think,
do people get defensive instead of reflexive or
yeah,
engaging? Yeah.
that's and I think that just is constantly going to get worse and worse and worse until you're able to see somebody's face and be able to speak the things that you want to do. And sadly, that's being taken out the door, a lot of things, because like Twitter for me, like, I mean, it's a positive place. It can be. It's a lot of, you see a lot of fighting, and mostly a lot of the stuff boils down to the political stuff. And that's kind of where it's like, that's never a good rabbit hole to go down.
Or at least the stuff that gets framed as political, right? Let's not pretend that it's a completely neutral act, which
How was
things are
Capitol
considered
Hill Christian
political.
nationalism? I don't get it.
Oh gosh. Oh no.
It's
We're
been
really
bogging my
going,
brain for
yeah.
like the last 6 days. I'm like, what the fuck what does that mean?
Yeah. But real quick before we move off of Twitter, I wonder if part of that is that when you all mediums, right, they have their advantages and disadvantages. I didn't realize until talking with you earlier this week that we would be able to see each other while we're able
Oh
to
yeah.
talk through this Zoom video.
I need to see your handsome face.
Oh, you're gonna make me blush. But
How old are you? Like 26?
24.
Oh, we're the
I'm a
same
young.
age.
Look at that. What are the odds? Probably pretty likely, maybe.
I don't know.
But all I was getting at was just that, right, in addition to pretty faces, I thought this would be like more of a phone call where we would not have the physical, cues you get from hand motions and facial expressions and stuff. So I wonder, in that first example you brought up of pointing out to someone, hey, you forgot a colon, because they lack the tonal and physical, communication you're able to give, say through a Zoom video or physically in person. if that limitation of the medium also kind of sets up people to, see each other more aggressively, or, automatically interpret themselves being attacked, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like this is a better way because I can tell the way that your social or facial cues are going. So I just know what you mean, and the way you say it, the tone just adds a different effect to it. But if you typed out what you're saying to me, or if this was written on paper or something, it just comes off in a completely different direction where it's hard for people to convey those types of things. And I think that's a large factor of what goes wrong in this world is miscommunication. I think that's not just Twitter, it's everything in the world is miscommunicated wrong. The way that they put a certain parenthesis or something on news sources, that's my biggest problem with media corporations, CNN, all these people saying this likely, but when they put likely, they put in parentheses, let you know it's likely that it's this. That doesn't mean that. It looks like it's being aggressive, like saying likely it's going to definitely be this. It's like, what are we talking about here? I mean, that happens with so much. Like, why do they have to feel the need to elaborate on the ethnicity of a certain ethnicity, not all across the board? It's not two white men killed, it's a certain other thing where it's like, are you riling people up on purpose? Like, are you trying to create a narrative? And if that narrative doesn't work, they go right to the vaccine narrative.
What work is being done by which strategic acts they choose to describe a narrative, right? Which details one chooses to highlight, how they choose to put parentheses or brackets or dash marks. Isn't it funny how those little details make a big difference in how you tell a story?
It's maybe I'm going fucking nuts. I don't know, but that's what I get out of it. I don't know if anybody else does. I mean, they have a thing one day, like first of all, there was no masks. And then CNN said it's probably good to wear masks. Then the dude comes in the next day who I see every morning. He's wearing a mask. He does exactly what CNN says. And I'm like, you went from having it to not having it to having it again, and now nobody else is doing it. It's just him, but he follows everything that they say like a trusted news source. And I'm like, our media is the first thing where you don't notice the subtle things that really add into a sentence on things that make it a bigger impact. And I think as a writer, you could probably see that as well too. Not saying you're a writer, but I'm saying as a writer, if you write, you will come across the words that you use have different gravity in the way that it's being spoken, depending on how the sentence flows. And that's the same thing they do on all these news things.
I do write, but not particularly well. I warn you.
I
I
use
write.
dictate on the microphone and it does it into Microsoft Word for me.
Right. That is a good tactic. Another good tactic to improve my writing, and I suspect it would help others, is to have it use the other function in Microsoft Word to have it read out to you what you typed, so that way you can imagine it being read by someone
Oh
else.
my God. That's changing the game on me.
Yeah, there's a big trick to writing in that by speaking out loud, your ears will pick up what your eyes don't with your writing. But going back to your earlier question for me that I kind of danced around, and it goes back into this when talking about Christian nationalism, an incredibly nebulous term. Both Christian and nationalism are so nebulous on their own, and then you throw them together, what do you get? One of the things I appreciate about the coverage about, I kind of don't want to talk about it, but I think we should talk about it, about January 6th, was that even at the time, I ran across some articles that were pointing at how what we choose to call this event has very concrete ramifications, right? Like if we call it an uprising or revolt, that seems very different than a protest, which seems very different than a gathering.
Well, how does that have a commission about it? And we don't get a commission for the Wuhan thing.
The Wuhan, oh, are you talking about COVID when you say that?
Yeah. And how Fauci, the day we're recording this is the 11th. I think it's going to be the 13th. He's going back for another talk about gain of function research because they found more articles saying that he actually did do it again. But that's a freaking thing. And the Epstein thing, we don't have a commission report on that. We have a court case we can't see. Why do we still have to talk about the Jan 6 thing? Did it matter that much? I'm more worried about the 4 cops that killed themselves from it, but nobody wants to talk about that.
Oof. Yeah. Which elements in the master narrative do we choose to emphasize? But right, with all of these things, which words we choose to describe them and how we choose to strategically order those words have pretty concrete repercussions. The reason I actually have been interested in nationalism for several years and studying it, and it just so happened that before I was going to start writing about some pieces about nationalism and some examples of quote unquote Christian nationalism, the whole January 6th thing went down. And the thing that I find so interesting about nationalism as a concept is that when people choose to call something nationalism and when they choose to call something patriotism, it's really interesting. Those two words are pretty much synonyms, but I can almost guarantee you if someone likes something, they're going to call it patriotism. And it might seem like a very obvious thing, but even in academic writing, when writers choose to be strategic and call something patriotism, it's funny how they put a different spin on it with such little effort, you know?
Well, it's so weird how the words in the English language that we choose to use can also mean so many different things. When I say the word quarantine to you, and then I say the word lockdown, those are the same exact fucking thing, but one makes you seem like you're a good person. That doesn't make any sense, but it's the way that they showed you. It's the way that they've said it over and over and over again, like mind control. But whatever. I mean, that's if they want to let the world go to shit, let the world go to shit. I don't know. You're going to see more acts just like the Jan 6 thing then. Like were those people confused? Sure. Maybe they call it patriotism. That's what they thought. I have no clue. But at the same time, I mean, is this not an incentivization or this not some type of goal that has been casted by this giant media that constantly changes its freaking narrative over and over and over again? There was Gabby Petito on the news for a month and a half and nobody talks about her anymore. But everyone gave a shit then. They got the dog, the bounty hunter's dusty ass over that. To me, that just seems very, very like, I don't know, fake. Like it just doesn't seem real. I'm not trying to get into like conspiracy side of that stuff. I'm just saying it's not real. Like nobody knew her before and then the media blasts it. So everyone has to care. Those happen countless of times, millions of people, not millions, thousands of people all across the world that happens to.
Can sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
I'm getting angry. It's okay.
But yeah, can I tell you a hot take I have that my friends roll their eyes at when I bring it up, but I will 110% stick to this hot take. Can I tell you? I would argue that actually the problems we face with media and social media, right? Whether by media we mean like news programs like CNN, Fox, what have you, or social media as in like Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, whatever. I would argue that the problems we have with these mediums are nothing new, that societies have been engaging with these problems for centuries. If you look at the way that, say, like an agora, like a market space in an ancient Roman city would have been, or really any ancient market space, it would have been a place of transaction, not only for the buying and selling of literal physical goods, but also gossip, news, propaganda, whatever you want to call these things. So I would argue that in our age where we have new mediums to express these things like Twitter and Facebook and what have you, sure, the medium has changed in that now it's in a virtual format. I can carry it around in my pocket in an iPhone or display it on my laptop. But the way that media creates narratives, puts them into plot, and then positions people within those plots in some ways and calls them to do action or to, you know, react in a certain way. I would argue that this is nothing new and that we've experienced this, we as in like humans in general, have experienced this for centuries. It's interesting though to see how with certain technological innovations, the mediums themselves change. Now it's not so much we're meeting in the physical marketplace talking about how this one person disappeared from our city or what have you. Now it's these these narratives that seem to be larger because of print and other kinds of virtual medium. But in reality, it seems like the mechanisms have always been at play. Again, whether that's in like a physical marketplace or it's on like the Facebook marketplace page, you know?
There's similarities and there's 100% differences as well too. There are differences with the exposure, the amount of people that see that, and the reaction time based upon that. Everyone can see that in a minute and react accordingly. But the message had to spread around town back in the day in the ancient Rome days. The message had to go and it took days and days before you knew your freaking one of your family members died in war. That took a long time. But if the bigger similarity, I would say, what's the iffy for? That's 100% what?
I mean, that is such a broad. If this was a Wikipedia article, I'd insert a citation
You can
needed
put
here,
up a
but
tweet saying you can eat your own shit and survive for the rest of your life. Everyone will see that and react accordingly to it. That message had to go all the way around your whole entire town. That took a long time to. Paul Revere had to ride a fucking horse to get his message across. Like there's a different reaction time there. There's not a question about that. But when it comes
sure,
to a
sure.
concept of when Gabby Petito's over with now, where's the next Gabby Petito? Where's the next person? If you're going to do it for one person, why don't you do it for another one? Why don't you do it for another one? Why don't you do it
Right.
for another one?
And that was when that discourse was happening. Something I noticed was a lot of people asking, why is it that a white blonde woman, when she goes missing, it makes national news, but when so many other people go missing, why not my relative? Why not my friend? Why not my member of my community? So I don't think you're alone in voicing the frustration I'm hearing you put out there of not only why this individual compared to all the other individuals that seem to be ignored when they go missing, but also why is it that people in general take this one narrative and run with it and do different things with it?
It's more like I'm not even like, it's just the political stuff. I'm like, look at all the bullshit. Like, I hate to say it like that, but that's really what it is, where it's like, I think there's a large amount of people that feel like they're more superior in thoughts than other people. And I feel like there's a lot of people that just don't really want to listen to anybody else. They just kind of want to ram whatever they think in their head through a fucking wall.
Sorry,
like,
did you say something?
But I think there's a large amount of, it's just, I don't know, maybe there's a large amount of discourse that's missing, I guess I should say.
Right. And that's been a recurring theme throughout our conversation, is discourse and relating one to another. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you use the word political, how would you define that word? Like, not to get super meta, not to get in the weeds, just to make sure we're on the same page.
American flag, white pillar, white pillar as in the columns that they use on any banking or any type of thing like that. Political, Republican, Democrat, political, president walking past Secret Service member telling him to enter door, walking across lawn, people telling him to turn around, letting him go.
The reason why
I don't know why I went to the Biden video.
Yeah, that's the reason I ask is not to put you on the spot or something, or like say gotcha. It's because I think, right, going back to discourse and things that hamper discourse, like the limitations of a medium like Twitter, I think people use certain words and automatically assume what they mean, right? Going back to what you were just saying of like, it seems like people don't want to listen. It seems like they just want to talk. And when it comes to the word political, I don't think a lot of people are aware that our word political has roots in the ancient Greek word for polis, like referring to a city or state.
Yeah.
And so if we think of the word political as anything referring to a city or state, well then crap, everything we do to some extent is political. It's just a matter of whether or not we recognize it as political, and what are the ramifications of whether we recognize something as political or not.
I'm talking about the specific people lined up in suits that are telling you what you are and are not going to do.
Sure. And I assume those people are wearing suits, right? Because they're probably in positions of power, whether they're in local. Suits. Yeah, exactly. So, all of this just to say that I think that it's constructive to think of everything as political in its own ways, which then has its own problem of then what does even the word political mean, where not that I think we've been doing that throughout this conversation, but we could be meaning very different things when we point to something and say that's political,
What do you think when you say political?
Yeah, so when I say political, I go with the silly definition that I just gave you of relating to the city or state, but I also think of this language that people use as a rhetorical tactic. Just like when something, kind of like the opposite of when someone says that's what I believe, as a way to try to diffuse, to try to relativize something to what they think. So that way you and I, or they and them, whoever, can't argue about it anymore because, oh, that's just something they believe. I think rhetorically, there's something interesting that happens when someone calls something else political. Because either that seems to like, right, invite conflict to the point that it diffuses the situation because no one wants to fight, it's sort of like a mutual escalation. Or it points out how things are in contention, how people actually don't agree on the things that it seemed like they should have agreed on. I think this is why it's useful to call American parties like the Republicans and the Democrats political, because sure, their actions, they do refer and relate to the city or the state, but also they're not as united entities as they try to portray themselves, right? They try to make themselves look like united fronts, but in reality, they're formed out of factions and sub-factions and individuals and groups who have different agendas and different things they want. So this is sorry that I keep going on these tangents and lectures, I keep talking, but I think that when we use the word political, there's an interesting thing rhetorically happening that happens. Wow, that was a weird sentence, but a similar thing happens when we call something political to when we say we believe in something or we have faith in something. There's a similar kind of weird psychology chess game, as you were kind of saying earlier, that goes on there.
Well, political by the term or definition isn't what it used to be. Political, what it is now, is the rat race or the lunchroom table fight that you see between left and right, and nobody else has a voice to the table. There are other people that can run for candidacy to be president. That's specifically politics, is anything to do with basically the determination of this country. For instance, the people used to tell the president what to do, and the president would make the vote on the justice of what the people wanted. Now it's the opposite way around. That's where I start looking at the power of control, and it starts leading into like Illuminati type territory or these types of things. But I think that it's a bigger kind of like hamster on a wheel type thinking, and they just sprinkle in whatever they want or choose to let us. I'm not saying there's like this giant overall Illuminati style thing. I just think that it's way too easy that when you are of a certain wealth class, or if you are of a certain standard, it's easier for you to do better than people who are poor. And I think a lot of people, that middle class is getting kind of out of there now. There's no middle class. It's now rich or poor. And sadly, most of the world is poor. So, I mean, that's what I think of when it comes to politics. I start to land in this area of like everything that you see from Balasio's wife losing $850 million to a mental health fund, saying she doesn't know where the money went. What do you mean you don't know where $850 million went? Like, that's corruption in itself. That's what the fate of what the world, or what these certain corporations that are basically getting whatever taken out of their hands. And I don't think, I mean, that's not just politics, that's everything. Life in general, people will do whatever they possibly can to get ahead from somebody. They'll do whatever they possibly can to get the upper edge, or do whatever they can to improve their life better, because that's how the environment is. It's not the world that's the issue. It's the way that it's been running. And the way it's been running has been competition, and cutthroat competition is the best game out there that we've seen defined.
Yeah, it's
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
No, I was just going to say that's the second time you've gotten at that with like the sort of the hyper competitive nature of our economic and sociological societal environment, excuse me. But, I also kind of heard you getting at some things there that sounded pretty classically Marxist to me, in the sense of like, I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's an inherently good or bad thing. I think that, quick side tangent, I think Marx as a thinker, as a theorist, is just like any other thinker or theorist for the most part. He has certain theoretical tools that he's developed to explain and talk about certain things, and how people approach and use those tools. Yeah, it doesn't really say much about the tool itself, just like how it doesn't really matter if a hammer is good or bad. What really seems to matter is how people use a hammer, right? Whether they're building something or hurting people or what have you. But all of this to say that the sort of class analysis I hear you getting at as well is definitely a driving force in our society, right? Where, for better or for worse, probably for worse, people do not have the same kind of realities because they don't have the same opportunities. And for a lot of that, that depends on who wins the birth lottery, right? Who happens to be born into a certain family with a certain kind of capital, whether that capital probably looks like, right, monetary capital, the ability to purchase and receive goods and services, because you happen to have a certain number of USD or whatever currency you happen to, be using. So this is what I mean when I say, like, I hear a sort of classical Marxist class analysis you're doing. Again, I don't think it's an inherently good or bad thing, but you're bringing up interesting points about how our societies aren't neutral. There are different forms of labor, and people have benefited or been exploited by the forms of labor they happen to have performed.
I think you're going to be able to find a hole in anything. And I just don't want that hole to ruin every single person's life, which that politics, yes, politics in general, that whole left, Democrat, Republican, all that type of stuff, just being concerned about that will do that to you. It'll drain you. It'll make you cut off relationships with people. It'll do a hell of a lot. I mean, it'll do so much you'll have to storm a Capitol building.
As
But,
I was just going to say, as you were saying at the very beginning, right? It'll cause you to break up with your significant other or block a family member on social media because you don't like a take. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
I mean, that's sadly, you can do that with anything, any single topic. You can bake bread better than someone else and it becomes a competition. That's just how it's, you can do that with anything. There's good aspects to friendly competition, and there's a good way to kind of make sure that, I think, in my belief, everyone kind of helps each other out in a certain type of way, whether that's just something small or connecting someone with somebody else or doing something from that. And it's these small little steps that really kind of everyone raises up rather than just one person. But it's always been, you got to do what you possibly can, because you're gonna, if you don't do it now, you're never gonna do it, or you're running out of time. So you got to act now. You got to hustle, grind, whatever you got to say. I don't know. I don't think that's the proper way to do it either, but I'm not going to get mad at someone for doing that type of thing. If you're on a different path, you're on a different path of that sort of thing. I think everyone's walking something in life, but I also think that they don't have to always necessarily walk alone.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's hard because there are some people you will meet where you will be like, this person's inferior to you. And it's just a subconscious thought. It doesn't mean it's a huge thought in there. But there are sometimes you're like, this person doesn't know about MK Ultra. This person doesn't know about Bohemian Grove. This person doesn't know about this. And then you just like, I have to sit here and spoon feed them this information, or you just walk away. And I don't know what's the correct answer in that. But I also don't think treating someone like they're lower than you is the correct one as well. I think there's an even playing field of being able to give a little bit of time without expecting payment for so.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I hear you getting at there, if I'm hearing you correctly,
don't examine my thoughts, say your own.
No, my thoughts are to examine your thoughts.
Mm.
I mean, what else is a conversation but us,
speaking how you feel.
Right.
That's a conversation.
That too, I was actually going to say, with subjects and predicates, right? If a thought is just a subject smashed with a predicate, a noun smashed with a verb, then when we're in discourse with each other, it seems like we're playing with each other's subjects and verbs. It's like a game of ping pong, with hitting the subjects back at each other. All that just to say that I think when it comes to the question you're asking there, I think that's a difficult question, but I think it's even more difficult when we remove it from certain contexts, right? Like, I think this is the thing that people, when they hear the word theory, they often get annoyed because they say like, oh, theory, you're just talking out of your ass. You're just saying things. Well, theory, when it's really usefully applied, it's applied to specific contexts. That's why like theory of gravity or germ theory, they aren't going to be useful outside of their context. If you try to use germ theory to explain why everything is instead of how you got the cold, that's
explain
a tool
gravity to a flat earther.
Oh, yikes.
Where it does apply, but they don't care.
Yeah. And this is this is what I'm getting at, right? Now you've provided a specific context where we're imagining we're engaging with a person who, for whatever reason or another, has never heard of Eratosthenes, and doesn't know that the Earth is spheroid,
Nope, it's
spherical.
flat and there's an ice ball.
But
I have a friend who's one, so it's an interesting time to.
do they also reject Newtonian physics?
They'll reject anything that tries to deny that the Earth is not flat.
So, like, and that would be with your friend. I think that would be fun to have a conversation with about, like,
You couldn't have a conversation with them.
we'll have a conversation with them about, like,
I
okay,
can't even have a
so,
conversation with them. That's the best part, is that
man,
their personality is so abrasive where it's like cutting you off before you can even say anything. It's like,
how do you have, like, thinking with Socrates and how he talks about friendship? How do you even have a friendship with this person then if you can't
everybody
even?
deserves your time and patience. Just about finding what that hole is. He's a good guy too. He's had a couple episodes on the show.
Um,
It's just so hard. Belief is a strong thing for a lot of people. I mean, it goes back to our original topic about religion. It's a hard thing to say. Surprisingly, I think you were the first person that hesitated at when I asked about, are you religious or not? Mostly it's because I talked to ex-cult people and they're vocal about the whole anti-cult, leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, all that type of stuff. But then I've also talked to people who are pastors and priests and talk about why they love it so much. And I'm like, there's a heavy middle ground to explain how you feel, and don't be afraid of how someone or a listener or whoever might view and hear that. You just got to speak what's on your mind. That's why I say I don't think I just kind of speak it. This is how I'm feeling. It's not really, I'm not trying to analyze how this is
you're
going
just
to be
going
taken
with
into
it.
context. And if it gets taken the wrong way, I'll explain just. I'll be like, I didn't mean it like that. I'm sorry. I said the Olive
Right.
Garden was good. And they're like, the Olive Garden is shit. I'm like, what?
We'll have a conversation later about the conversation we were having earlier if we need to.
No,
I guess.
God. I'll do a
But
preface.
the reason why I hesitate is because the word religion often functions as a second order category. People are looking at other things and saying that thing over there, that's religious. And we do this with all kinds of categories like sports and music.
You brought up politics earlier. People do that.
Sure. Politics is another example. Yeah. So when you ask, like, am I religious? Most of the actions I do on a daily basis, I don't stop and think and say, oh, I'm being religious now, whatever that looks like. But I do have. Do what?
I said cross yourself.
But I was actually just about to say, I have little rituals and things I do that if someone were to follow me throughout their day, they might very well look at it and say, that seems kind of religious. Why do you smack the hood of your car and say, good job, Yertle?
You slap the hood of your car?
Yeah, like when my vehicle's doing a good job. And I'm on a Zoom right now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm on a podcast right now. I'm sorry. Can I talk with you in a minute, or?
No, I'm not here to you. Is this group scheduled for this right now?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll be done in like 10 minutes.
All right, no worries.
So I'm so sorry, Daniel.
No.
You were so polite.
Scheduling error there. My bad.
Oh,
but
did you schedule a private room for this?
Yeah, in the department, I scheduled a room, and there was apparently there was a breakdown in communication somewhere, but that's a-okay. All I was getting at, though, was just that I don't personally think of myself as religious in a number of ways, for better or for worse. But there's, going back to our favorite P word, there's a whole politic there of what work is being done. Like earlier when you were describing the people you have on the show, there's an entire politic of when and what we choose to call something a cult, and when and what we choose to call something a religion there. And I don't really want to, we could get into that, but just to throw it out there to say that when we choose to call these things, we have different goals in mind. Sorry.
Yeah, people pull what they want out of something rather than necessarily what the other person meant. People will assume that you meant this rather than what you actually meant. I mean, it's the same thing back to we're talking about the social media misconfusion or miscommunication that happens with that. It's very, very hard because assumptions lead you down the darkest of paths at times as well too, but also assumptions can keep you safe. That's the weird double-edged sword of that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? Is like talking about assumptions. It's difficult to talk about assumptions without making assumptions about assumptions, and all of a sudden
you're in a Dr. Seuss book.
Yeah, exactly. No green eggs and ham for me, please.
I will not, could not on a boat. I would not, could not on a float.
What about the eggs makes them green is what I never got.
I don't know. That's a weird one.
I
And you
kinda
can
don't
make them
wanna
in
know.
school. They put green dye in it.
How about we go with all the places you can go? I feel like that's a better Dr. Seuss
Redfish,
book.
bluefish.
Okay, that's a classic.
That's a
Yeah.
political one too.
But I guess, yeah. I mean, why do you say that? I'm like, now I'm curious. I want to know.
red and blue, bro. That's the whole reason why they choose red and blue. They're opposite colors and they make it really good when someone wears a red tie. You know he's a Republican.
Oh, there's that one story about the guys with the stars and the ones who don't have the stars and how they hate each other. Have you read that one?
The guys that have a stars and guys that don't have a stars.
Yeah, there's a Dr. Seuss book. It escapes me at the moment where there are these bird-looking people, and one group of bird people hate the other group because they have stars and vice versa. And so this guy invents this machine. I'm not kidding. I'm being serious right now. This guy in the
send
book,
it to me. I have no clue what you're talking
I
about.
will look into it for you. But this guy invents a machine that will either give you a star or remove your star. So he has all these birds like running through the machine because they hate each other. And like for whatever reason, they keep giving him their money, whether or not they want a star or not. And at the end of the book, all the birds are broke. The guy's super wealthy, and all the birds realize they just spent so much money in such like a futile, like wasteful effort. So I will look into this book.
That's why people call Dr. Seuss like a classist or whatever the hell they call him.
I mean, maybe
people pulling weird shit out of Dr. Seuss books. It's a children's book. Move on.
I mean, what better place though to put a complicated message than in a children's book?
See, that's when you start looking at conspiracies freaking everywhere. You gotta be careful with that one too. I entertain them because it's fun, but I just want to sit on like the steps of, I don't know. I'm not gonna say the Capitol. That would be a stupid pun joke.
It might be beautiful this time of year. Probably very cold.
People have been there already. I would sit like on like the Lincoln Monument and just kind of like on the steps of it and just eat a sandwich and just look at that reflecting pool that's so beautiful and just relax. That's a heaven scenario. That's a perfect, just nobody talking, just eating a PB&J. No jelly, peanut butter only.
I'm gonna send you that Dr. Seuss book. And have you ever read the Tao Te Ching before? Random
You have
question.
to send me that too. I don't read books.
That is a-okay. The reason I ask is because, well, one, there's a ton of different translations. So just like with the Bible, just like with so many documents in English, it can be translated different ways. Put that aside. A recurring message throughout the Tao Te Ching is that thoughts cause anxiety. So to live a life where you aren't thinking, you're just doing. I'm paraphrasing, but if you're not thinking and you're just doing, you're going to live a life without anxiety, worries, these kinds of things. So this is why we should avoid politics in general, even though the Tao Te Ching is kind of weird because in an indirect way, it is a political document.
Ignorance is bliss.
Kind of. Yeah, kind of. But yeah, peanut butter and jelly sandwich on the steps of a monument doesn't sound too terrible right now. Sorry, peanut butter and jelly, but no jelly apparently.
Just a peanut butter sandwich. But if you say that, people go, what the hell's wrong with you?
How about you give me the jelly from your sandwich and I'll have an extra jellier? The jelliest sandwich.
All right. That's a fair point. Fair point. Sharing is caring. Joseph, I'd love to have you back on, man. I know you got to get ready to wrap it up, but where can people find you? Your Twitter link, is that the only thing you have, or do you have anything else?
Yeah, I do have a Twitter. I also have my own website that I made. So I could also shoot that your way as well.
What's it called?
It is currently called DeFrank Blogs, but I'm thinking I'm going to change it. So I think I'll throw that your way, perhaps, if you'd like it.
Yeah, I'm gonna link it all in the description anyway. I just usually let people say their links so people can hear it and
advertise themselves just like on their Twitter in their bio, huh?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, if it's in your bio, I'll incorporate it in there.
I meant with what you were saying at the very beginning with like
about the
people
philosophy
saying,
and Twitter thing.
Yeah, I'm a stand-up comedian and I'm a broadcaster. Whatever.
I know so many people where I'm like, bro, like.
But yeah, I am afraid I have to go, sadly.
Okay, perfect. We'll do another one, dude. Thank you, Joseph, for doing the podcast, and thanks for everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank.